Okay, good morning. Right. So, for those of you who might not have been here yesterday, so a few people from UMass, I'm Mark Holzer. I'm a professor at the Institute for Public Service here within the business school, and I'm the executive director of the National Center for Public Performance. And it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Mark Abrahams for our workshop this morning on performance management back to basics. He is president of the Abrahams Group, an independent management consultant specializing in governmental financial performance and operations management, and he's got over 30 years of experience in this field, all of which are going to get distilled into a little less than an hour, in a sense. He's one of the early implementers of performance management in the United States. He's worked with cities from coast to coast, including Newark, New Jersey, where I spent a lot of time working with them as well. He's really preached performance management and brought his knowledge base, outside the U.S. as well. He's got a bachelor's degree in political science from Lake Forest College, a master's degree from the Urban Studies Institute of the University of Toledo, and an MBA from Suffolk University. So, always glad to see our alums here. He's a certified public accountant, a member of the advisory board for the dean of the Suffolk University Sawyer Management School, a frequent presenter and speaker on performance management. There is nobody more knowledgeable. So, Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome to Boston. So, at least I have a little accent, more than Mark does. So it's nice to be back to Suffolk, not Suffolk, but Suffolk. Just a little background. Mark mentioned that I've got poli-sci in my background. Always loved government. But there was the accountant side of me that got the CPA, and I kind of combined the two. And when you look at government financial statements, it doesn't tell the whole story. The whole performance side is missing. You can get your balance sheet and get your income statement, but then what? And so I kept asking, how do I know that a government is efficient? How do I know that a government is effective? And that led me into performance. And I started really when the performance management, what I call the performance management movement, began in the early 90s. Key to those were two that I'll talk about early, Indianapolis and Milwaukee, which kind of set the stage. And in Indianapolis, well, anyway, so what I want to do is take a 35,000-foot high-level approach to what I think is performance management. Show you a few slides. I got a lot of slides, but I'm going to go through just a couple of those. And ask you to take a selfie of yourself and your organization and where you fit into this concept of performance management. So when you looked at Indianapolis, when you looked at Milwaukee, and there were several things going on at the time, GFOA just started to get involved in performance. They were migrating from what I would call a financial management focus to a performance measurement focus, and ultimately into performance management. At the same time, GASB was researching what they called service efforts and accomplishments reporting. Service efforts, inputs, service accomplishments, outputs, and outcomes, and focused more on the reporting of performance information and established about 16 criteria for what those reports should contain. But that's when we first had a true definition of inputs, of outputs, of outcomes, and efficiencies. And then GASB also had a focus on citizens, and thus the concept of citizen perceptions and citizen satisfaction, and the growth of what we call service quality measures. All of that, I want to share some thoughts with you on that. So big picture, but yesterday, and I also want to integrate some of the themes that came out of yesterday as well. One of the things we talked about yesterday was collaboration. And Kristen talked a lot about how Somerville collaborates with a lot of universities, as did Emily. So there's a story that the mayor of Somerville went to a conference at the Kennedy School, and the late Tom Menino turned to him and said, you know, you should really get involved in this activity-based costing and performance stuff. And so we did. And that led him to talk to his finance director, who called me. And the next thing I knew, I was speaking before a class of about 90 or 100 Kennedy students. And Curtatone was preaching, come help us in Somerville, we need your help, we need your enthusiasm, we want to set up this performance system. And so I came in and talked about the basics. 90 or 100 kids, so we were hoping for 10, maybe 8 or 10 to help us in this. How many do you think signed up? 47. Holy crap. How are we going to handle 47 students in setting up a performance system for Somerville? I had an office at the Kennedy School. They called me professor. And, you know, the kids chose the departments that they wanted, that they had an interest in. One of the kids wanted, all he wanted to do was ride a fire truck. So he signed up for the fire department, and that was the last time we saw him in this project. That's all he wanted to do, sit next to the Dalmatian. But out of that, came the activity-based system in Somerville, departmental goals, performance measures, what we call an activity-based budget in Somerville. But the real outcome was 47 young people that had enthusiasm about performance and could take that all over the world, because literally there were students all over the world there. So that's another story about collaboration that I hope fits well with you. In Indianapolis, Mayor Goldsmith wanted to fund a very large capital program, didn't have the money, but thought there was a lot of inefficiencies in the way Indianapolis worked. And so he started two things. One, he wanted a performance system where first he could have what he called a popular budget, not necessarily that people would like what was in the budget, but the world, the citizens, the departments could at least understand what the city was trying to accomplish. And he organized that budget by outcomes, not by departments, not by line items. Clean streets, safe neighborhoods. And we restructured the entire budget to focus on those outcomes. He also had activity-based costing. He always said, Mark, do you know how much a chuck hole costs to repair? I never heard of chuck hole. And I said, sure. You know what a chuck hole is? It's a pothole. But in Indianapolis, it was a chuck hole. And he believed if you didn't know how much a service cost, how do you know if you're competitive? How do you know if you're charging, through taxes, a reasonable amount for that service? And at that time, nobody knew what any service cost. And he also introduced competition, the bid process. And that helped incentivize the departments to really get on board with this performance concept because he was going to lower the cost of government in Indianapolis. So the popular budget, ABC, competition were three themes coming out of Indianapolis. And then the late Ann Kinney, who was up in Milwaukee before she went to GFOA, heard about this, flew in to see what we were doing, and out came the concept of linking a program-based, performance-based budget to the strategic plan in Milwaukee, which was the predecessor for all of the GFOA best practices relating to performance. Best practices, recommended practices in performance, and GFOA was a leader in trying to integrate strategic planning with measurement, costing, and performance. At the same time, the GASB was looking into these concepts, and all of this came together in the early 90s. And so we sat around a table one day and we just started to draw circles. What key characteristics made these performance systems work? And so out came this concept of strategic planning. How many of you have strategic plans? Okay, when you ask that question in the 90s, one or two hands would show up. And strategic plans were, in those days, 5 years, 10 years, not NASA's, 25 years? But still the concept of what does a community want? What are the major outcomes they want to achieve? What's the direction? And can they articulate that so departments can develop program plans? And with that, program goals. And can they take their budget, which might be a line item budget, and begin to reformat that and insert goals and accomplishments into the budget process? But at least before the budget process, to define what they do, for whom, and what's the purpose, what's the outcome they're trying to achieve. That then sets up the measurement process. Because if we know what departments want to accomplish, and in theory they're aligned to the strategic plan, or at least some direction, it may not have to be a formal strategic plan, but give me a set of 10 goals that the mayor wants to accomplish, the city council wants to accomplish, the town manager wants to accomplish, so that departments have some kind of direction to develop their programs, to develop their goals. And yesterday we were talking about the hierarchy of this. Ideally, this is alignment, starting with the strategic plan, flowing down into departmental programs. But in the early days, the departments knew more about their programs. They had a lot of cost data. It just wasn't formalized, it just wasn't systemized. And so they influenced the strategic plan. It was kind of bottom up rather than top down, but in many cases it was a combination of the two. To me, it doesn't matter as long as there is alignment here. At this point, you know your programs, and you may have decentralized that into sub-programs or activities, and you're set up now to measure results. And that's where the inputs, the outputs, the outcomes, the efficiencies come in. Initially, you start with outputs. And in the process, take your inputs, the salaries, the maintenance, the operations, the capital, and link that not by departments, but by programs. Maybe a subset of departments, but programs that would be really the appropriations that a department would receive, and have the inputs, the outputs, at least initially, and then grow that into outcomes over the years, and grow that into service quality. So you would have a family of measures, not just an input to output and getting the cost per unit, but talk about the quality of that particular program. Talk about the outcomes and the impact that program is having on the citizens, as well as their perceptions. I mean, how many times do the police department gets public perceptions of crime in their neighborhoods? And then they look at the perception and compare that to actual results, and there's a disparity. And that gives the police department data to go out to the community and say, here's what's happening in your neighborhood. Why do you have these perceptions? So at this point, you're ready to populate what I call a performance budget, or a more informed budget. Goldsmith called it a popular budget. But to do that, several things had to happen, because the budgets were mostly line item. They weren't organized by program. So you had to shift the budget into a program format. And then we'd like to think we could populate the budget with performance data and put some narratives into that and get some meaningful communication so that the departments can A, tell their stories, and B, reach the public. In my view, the budget is the most widely read document in a city or town, not the financial statements, but the budget. And we set up budget to actual reports to control the appropriation. Well, guess what? We can set up budget to actual reports to control or monitor results. The alignment of systems also looks at the payroll system, because if you want to know your costs, then let's look at how to align your pay by these programs or activities so we can get some true costing and see if we're producing a service or a product or a program or an activity, whatever you call it, reasonably well. The alignment of systems also gets into the theme of yesterday, data analytics. And so we want to see a data system that is aligned to the measures, that is aligned to the programs and activities, and that can always get back to the alignment of strategic planning. Now we're ready for the budget, and we can populate what was a line item budget, transforming that to a program or activity budget with narratives, with performance cost data, and performance metric data coming from the data analytics. So the budget transforms from what has been traditionally a line item budget into a more informed budget, and call it what you want. We heard terms yesterday of program budgets, performance budgets, outcome budgets. It's basically the same concept, looking at the services you're providing and informing that with performance type data. And again, initially, the output data is the place to start. I'm going to a small town in Massachusetts on Wednesday. All we're going to talk about is goals and then outputs. That's it, to get them started on this path. Then two things happen. We manage the work process, and this gets into the monitoring that we talked about yesterday, and or evaluate the results. In the early days, these were separate. Today, I would suggest with data analytics, they're kind of combined into one concept. Using the data to help manage the process, to make informed decisions. This is where you really get into looking at efficiencies and effectiveness. This answers the question, are you efficient? Are you effective? We talked about shadowing yesterday. We talked about stealing, pasting from others. And I would suggest that's a good thing. If I want to benchmark my streets activity to another community, and they have a better cost per unit, and they have better outcomes, and they're producing more outputs, what are they doing better than what I'm doing? And so I want to go to that community and talk to them and see if I can learn through benchmarking, through shadowing, how to make my program more effective or more efficient. And so to me, benchmarking is a good thing to do. But I found that the best benchmarking is to yourself over time, to look at your programs and activities over time. And are you improving in your efficiencies, and are you improving in your effectiveness? And then we get to the reporting. So in reporting, we see many types of reports. The Service Efforts and Accomplishments reporting, Prince William County, Portland, Oregon, where they would take service areas, fire, police, and break those down into their programs and show results, and show inputs and outputs and outcome type results. State auditors here from Massachusetts. Okay, you guys are running the centric reporting program. We have centric reports, citizen-centric reports, about 3 or 4 pages that kind of summarize a lot of this material. We have basic performance reporting, but essentially, you could break this down as simply as, here's what you said you were going to do, here's what you've done, you did better, you did not so good, and so how you're going to continue to provide more efficient services more effectively. And it's not a hammer. As we heard from several speakers yesterday, we want to help. We want to use data analytics to help make us more efficient and more effective. So you see in the middle, we're talking about accountability, and we're talking about a cultural and structural change. And to some, this is a cultural shock to look at data differently, to look at how we manage differently. For what purpose? To improve our efficiencies, to improve our effectiveness. We didn't use the terms efficiency and effectiveness yesterday, but I think that's what we were trying to do, to achieve a higher level of efficiency, a higher level of effectiveness. And then it gets back as a circle, more of a system approach, because now we have the data from our evaluation, we have our performance reporting data, we can see where we need to make some changes. That might go back into strategic planning, probably not, but it would go back into program planning, activity planning, revising goals, revising targets, and hopefully improving on our results. So that's the 35,000-foot level. Any questions on that? Any thoughts on that? So I think it's an ongoing systematic approach, and we did talk yesterday about this being a system approach to improving results through evidence-based decision-making, continuous organizational learning, and a focus on accountability for performance. It's integrated into all aspects of an organization's management and policy-making process and transforms an organization's practices so they are focused on achieving improved results for the public. So if we go back, whoops, wrong way. Yesterday we heard from San Francisco, they had 11,000 1,100 measures that then they really filtered down into more of the key performance measures. Yesterday, we talked a lot about data analytics and how systems were changing with data analytics. We didn't talk much about budgeting yesterday, but we did spend a lot of time here. We talked about benchmarking a few minutes ago. Philadelphia streets, we talked about using data analytics for the big bellies, and when a big belly was full, we didn't see the sanitation department pick that up. We have that electronically so we could have them go back and collect that trash. So a lot of themes that came out of yesterday kind of fit into this picture. So if you think of GFOA looking at the integration of budgets and strategic planning, with X dollars, I can get Y results. Then if you look at the GASB material, with X dollars, I got Y results. And to me, the merging of these themes from two pretty powerful organizations back then made a lot of sense. So can this work? Just a couple of thoughts on this. I think performance measures, data analytics, can work if they're associated with a system of performance management. In and of itself, without these other criteria, not so sure about that. That the data systems that you are developing support these concepts of performance management. And that the decision makers that will use the data are trained and prepared to use the data. So this is the 3-hour presentation, and it's really busy. So what happened is in 2010, the National Advisory Commission on Performance Management pulled together many of the national organizations, state budget officials, state auditors, state controllers, GFOA, ASBO, School Business Management, and said, what are the key criteria for a performance management system? And they boiled it down to planning, budgeting, management, evaluation. Themes that we talked about yesterday, themes that I talked about earlier. But look at the middle. That measurement, data analytics, and reporting support all elements of performance. And this was then the mantra of performance management going forward since 2010, and had the consensus of many of the major organizations. What's wrong with this picture? In many jurisdictions that I walk into, here's my budget. Isn't that great? No. I mean, it's not telling any story. It has a lot of inputs, but what do you do? What are the programs and services that you're providing? What are the goals you're trying to accomplish? Why are you trying to accomplish those goals? What's the data telling you in terms of what needs to be done? What's your backlog? Can you turn this into a narrative? Can you turn this into programs? Can you turn this into outputs and eventually outcomes? Can you talk about the satisfaction of your citizens with what you are providing? So one of the themes I want to hop on this morning very briefly is the role of the budget, because we really didn't talk about that yesterday. But we're seeing a shift of emphasis from budgetary inputs, from those line items, into outputs and eventually outcomes, the linking of dollars to results, the integration of budgeting and strategic planning, and associate focus on long-term results, integrating performance information into the budget document, making it a more informed document, developing a budget based on services, and for each program, develop a program goal with measurable inputs, outputs, efficiency, and outcome measures. And to that end, it would help to know what the cost of these programs are before you put a dollar amount into the budget document. That helps you to communicate your story, helps you to communicate the planned accomplishments you're trying to achieve. So when I say at minimum, this is what I like to see for every program: a goal on the left and then a set of measures on the right. But look at the goal for a minute. The goal of criminal investigations is to investigate sex, death, robbery, burglary, and other crimes involving violations of law in order to prosecute violators. A, to tell you what they're trying to do in criminal investigations. Can you see the outputs coming from the goal statement? Can you see the outcome coming from the goal statement? It's all there. And it's not a thesis. It's a concise statement. And if we could replicate that for every program in every department, we'd have a very concise document, which then we could put into the budget. Look on the right side. What does it cost? That's the input. Number of cases investigated, number of arrests, number of convictions, outputs. But that's a ladder, what I call a ladder. We start a case investigation. We identify those that can be arrested. And of those, we can convict some of them. And as we go up that ladder, we get closer to an outcome. What's our cost per investigation? That's the efficiency. Percent of customers who rate criminal investigations as good to excellent, that's our service quality. We wouldn't give the people we arrested the survey, but what about the lawyers that work with us? What about the judges that work with us? And as an outcome, percent of cases closed. So what we try to do is get some kind of service quality measure as well as a real objective outcome measure. So we have our inputs, our outputs, service quality, efficiency, and outcome. The service quality, the outcome gets us to effectiveness. The efficiency, cost per investigation, gets us to the efficiency. And then that goes back to where we started this morning. How do you know your programs are efficient? How do you know your programs are effective? I go to the beach a lot, and I marveled at seagulls. Why? They're all aligned. They're all facing in the same direction. Why? Because that's where the wind is coming and it's easy for them to fly. But wouldn't it be nice if we can get our entire organization aligned? I mean, if seagulls can do it, why can't we? So what we're trying to do with this alignment is link our strategic outcomes and goals through departmental missions, through departmental programs, and through activities. And as we get to the strategic goals, more than one department impacts that strategic goal. We talked yesterday about breaking down silos. This is a way to do that, to get other departments involved in attaining these more strategic outcomes. So, credit to Dan Ravello. Dan, next time you go to a Massachusetts meeting and sit next to me, be aware. But yesterday, Philadelphia talked about big bellies. And I call these talking garbage cans. And we talked about the big bellies sending out signals so you could tell how full they are. So on the left, this is what Dan would talk about, dumb bellies, dumb trash bin. And on the right are the big bellies. So if I remember right, Dan, Cambridge had 800 of these dumb trash cans, and you had about 300 of the big bellies? Okay. I was giving you more credit on that. So what intrigued me, I mean, this goes back to the evolution of systems and technology to support what you're doing. What intrigued me is that how can a trash can, garbage can, send out a signal? Hey, I'm 80% full, pick me up. And so that helps with the trash pickup, and hopefully it helps become more efficient and more effective. We saw some slides from Philly that there's some negative side to that, but overall, this is an example of where technology really has improved over the years. Yesterday, we talked about the potential for you to save money and then lose it as a money grab. So I would argue, let's take the savings that you make through these efficiencies and reinvest it into your programs. And so catch basins, to me, is something that should be cleaned every year. One of my clients cleaned them every 5 years. I said, why? Well, we've always done it that way, and we're afraid to go to the council and ask for more money. I said, but think of the outcome you can achieve. Not only will your outputs improve, but think of the cleaner environment. So they asked for a Vector truck. That's what you're seeing here. Now, in the old days, you cleaned catch basins with a crew. No more. You get one of these Vector trucks, and they're expensive. One person. Takes a while to clean, but think of first of all, the efficiency savings over time. You're not paying for a full crew. And think of the increased outputs you're going to have, and the real benefit is a more cleaner environment. This is our Massachusetts Turnpike about 20 years ago. What are we trying to pick up? See the litter? How many people do we need to pick up one piece of litter? The trash spotter, the trash retriever, the trash bag holder. Do you have a twist tie specialist in your city or town or state? 2 supervisors and always a police escort. I mean, this is stretching it, but this is a deep look at how efficient you are. Once you have your costs by service, and going back to Goldsmith, how much does it cost to fill a chuck hole? You can answer the question of how efficient you are. So when I saw Brian's slide yesterday, I had to find this slide and put it in. Efficiency is important, but we can't sacrifice quality just to lower our costs. We have to have some degree of control, some degree of outcomes that we want to achieve. This came to me, I did an article on the Iowa paint crews, activity-based costing for the Iowa paint crews, and 2 days later, somebody emailed me this. I still don't know who that person is. so I can't give them any credit like I gave Dan credit earlier. And ultimately, we're trying to improve our outcomes. See the bridge that nobody's using? See the congestion on the other side? And one engineer turns to the other and says, well, why did you build the bridge over there when the congestion's over on the left side? And the other engineer says, well, I thought my objective was to build a bridge, not to reduce congestion. This slide helps when I do training clear up the difference between an output and an outcome, and it's pretty powerful. But I showed this slide in Puerto Rico one day, and they laughed because they built a bridge that nobody uses, and I didn't know that. So, in summary, we talked about analytics yesterday a lot, and we have more technology and analytics to discuss after this presentation. And that gets back to the data that supports the measurement, that supports the programs, that supports the outcomes, that supports the plans. The measurement itself and the analytics that support it is not an end of itself. It's got to be part of a performance management system that has some degree of strategic focus, if not a strategic plan, and a major degree on program and activity management. And it needs to be integrated to the budget, even to the accounting, the monitoring, the evaluation, and reporting. And I love this quote from Mayor Norquist. First of all, the guy is 6'7", very imposing when you look at him. Citizens care about efficiently provided services, lower property taxes, safe neighborhoods, employment opportunities, clean air, and a broad range of recreational opportunities. They care about results. Citizens care less about inputs, how we are organized, about which department is responsible for what. The problem is that sometimes we have a tendency to view the world from a departmental perspective rather than from our customer's perspective. So, a 35,000-foot look at performance, tying in some themes from yesterday, and we got about a couple minutes for questions or comments or thoughts.
So your slide with the turnpike, how do you overcome, how would you recommend of seeing that inefficiency of having a lot of people that is not needed can be overcome if some of it has to do with maybe union regulation
Okay.
and other culture perspective?
So the question is the turnpike slide. How do you make it more efficient? So a couple of thoughts. If Goldsmith was sitting here, he said, I cut out the managers. But the reality is, if you look at this, some of those activities that you do need more staffing. We can move people from one activity to another activity. You have to work with the unions on that, but nobody's losing a job. But you need to know the data, that one activity is not meeting expectations, not meeting citizen satisfaction, not meeting their goals, just output goals, or the backlog is growing. You got to put more investment into that activity. So you move people around. That's how I'd answer that. That was from San Francisco. So Kathy, before you asked me the question, you see in that evaluation where program evaluations fit? Okay, go ahead.
Most of our government programs are, the biggest cost is personnel, right? The grant programs would be the exception. So how do you get a government organization actually keep track of their personnel costs to the granularity you need to understand how much it costs to do
Okay.
various activities.
So the question was, personnel costs, 85% when you throw in fringe benefits. How do you take that and granularize it so you know the cost of providing the service? Let me answer that two ways. The hard way, you change your systems, you get a time and attendance that gets you to these activities. They write their hours by these activities. They're reviewed, and you have some degree of confidence that those reporting time is accurate. If you don't have the money or the time to do that, then you do what we started in Newark, to take a look at, let's take a look at 1 week in a winter month, 1 week in a summer month, get a costing of that and extrapolate that. Is it as accurate? No. But is it better than what you have? Yes. And then there's so many things in between that you can address to answer that question. Good question. Other thoughts? Yes?
What's the best way to convince administration that that money that's saved should go back into the program that saved it? Because I agree that that is really how to incentivize better savings, but I haven't been successful in making that argument.
Have them call me. I mean, the simple answer is, if you don't give us back the monies we save, we're losing incentive. You're not going to achieve these results going forward. It's kind of a very myopic, short-term approach to saving money. Now, that Vector truck's going to last a long time. Question?
You can just go back to the slide that you had,
Which one?
the one which had all the indicators.
You mean the big circle?
I think you skipped that. Yeah, this one. Now, in these, what if you achieve 3 and you don't achieve the target for the rest?
Okay.
How would you make a judgment at the end?
All right.
You've got a list of 6, 7 things over there. I sort of achieve the targets for 3, or maybe even 4 or 5, but not for the 2.
I think you all heard that question. So, what I like to approach this is a family of measures. It's measuring everything, your inputs, your outputs, your effectiveness through outcomes and service quality, as well as your efficiency. So, Kristen talked yesterday about Somerset, how departments come in and discuss their performance. And so let's say we have met 3 of these, but we haven't met the other 3. So we talk about that. And let's take, well, number of arrests. Let's take an output, for example, but let's make it more concrete. Paving of lane miles, fixing of potholes, more day-to-day, more controllable than the number of arrests. If your target was to do 1,200 potholes in a month and you did 600, you talk about that. And maybe you don't have the right equipment, or the equipment is too old and continually breaks down. So we have that vehicle downtime that we talked about yesterday. I think it was DC that talked about it yesterday. And then you start to shift your investments to start solving that problem. Other questions? Yes?
One of the things that we struggle with, I struggle with my staff, is the output versus outcome. Is there some advice you can give on how to make that distinction?
Okay. So when I give this to Mallory, you'll get all these slides. The distinction between outputs and outcomes. Remember the ladder? So this is a parental program, trying to get parents more involved in educating their kids. So how many programs did you hold as a city or town? Number of programs held, output. Parents attending the program, another output. Parents completing the program, another output, but more meaningful as you climb up that ladder. Okay, now you have to survey them. You came to our program, you graduated our program. Did you do anything different at the house to help your child get more educated? Or did you help them with homework? Or did you make sure that they had their breakfast before they left? If the answer is yes, then your program has achieved some degree of effectiveness. If the answer is no, then why do they even come if you're trying to change their behavior to improve results for the kid? Then we get into outcomes, which could be children have better attendance, children may have improved grades, children may have fewer behavioral problems, and ultimately fewer dropouts. Or maybe your focus is improved grades, and so you can shift those around. But I think this helps clarify, A, the ladder, and B, output versus outcome. We out of time?
Well, we could give you the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So, thank you.
All right, I'll take that off later.